What would you do if your 10-year-old nephew spilled soup on your pants and then coldly demanded you lick it off? I went through that situation. That day, in front of more than 20 guests at a party at my parents' house, I almost lost my mind. But what hurt me wasn't my nephew's disrespectful behavior. I was angry and heartbroken because of how my mom and dad protected their precious grandson. What I did next shocked everyone in that party room. Before I get into the details of this story, let me say thank you from the bottom of my heart. Thank you for taking the time to follow this story. Hello everyone. I'm Adrian, 35 years old. I'm the founder of Green Harvest Solutions, a company that specializes in providing organic agricultural products to clean food farms throughout California and its neighboring states. Right now, my life is very peaceful. In the morning, I go to the office to work. In the evening, I return to my 3-bedroom house in suburban Sacramento, and my girlfriend cooks dinner. Then we watch movies or take a walk together. Anna and I have known each other for 5 years. Anna accepted my proposal a month ago, and we're planning to get married in 3 months. For me now, life is just work and Anna. As for my family, my parents, my sister, and my relatives, I'm no longer involved with them. I feel pleased about that. For you to understand why I'm no longer involved with my family, I have to tell you about the party in August 2022. That day was a weekend, and it was also my mom's birthday. My mom was 65 at the time, and she decided to throw a big party with about 20 guests, including friends, neighbors, and relatives who lived nearby. A week before the party, Mom called me. As soon as I picked up the phone, Mom's voice rang out with rare excitement. Adrian, remember to come home for Mom's birthday. Bring Anna too. I haven't seen her in a long time. Hearing that voice, I felt a bit warm inside. Even though the relationship between my family and me wasn't very close, it was still Mom's birthday, and I thought I should be there. After a few seconds of hesitation, I replied, yes, I'll come home. I'll tell Anna. After hanging up, I sat quietly for a while. A vague feeling welled up inside me, as if something was waiting for me at that party. But I pushed that thought aside and continued with my work. I had no idea that the decision to attend the party would completely change the relationship between my family and me forever. On Mom's birthday, Anna and I drove from Sacramento to Fresno, where my parents live. The trip took about 3 hours. When we just stepped into my parents' house, familiar faces were already there in full attendance. The living room was packed with people. Laughter and chatter echoed everywhere. The smell of delicious food wafted from the kitchen. A few acquaintances came over to ask about my work. Some even joked about when Anna and I planned to get married. I politely answered a few questions, then took Anna's hand to find Mom. Mom was in the backyard at the time, talking to a distant relative. My dad was helping with grilling meat outside with a few other men. Anna and I walked over and gave Mom the scarf that Anna had carefully chosen all week. When Mom opened the gift box and saw the silk scarf, her face suddenly lit up. She held the scarf up to admire it, then turned to me with a bright smile and said, "It's so beautiful. Thank you both. I love it." Looking at Mom's smile, I felt a bit warm inside, but that warm feeling didn't last long. After giving Mom the gift, I brought Anna back to the living room, and that's when I saw Daisy, my sister, along with her 12-year-old son, who had just walked into the house. The kid's name was Jackson. He was Daisy's precious son, my parents' golden grandson. Since he was little, Jackson had been spoiled by the whole family to the point of being rotten. He got whatever he wanted, and no one dared say a harsh word to him. As soon as he saw Anna and me, Jackson didn't say hello. The kid even stuck his tongue out at me provocatively right in front of everyone, his eyes gleaming with mischievous defiance. Seeing that behavior, I frowned and yelled, "Jackson, what the hell are you doing?" Jackson's reaction after that surprised me. He showed no fear or shame at all. Instead, he ran over and hugged Daisy tightly with a pitiful look as if he had just been bullied. Immediately, Daisy turned to look at me with annoyed eyes. Her voice was ice cold as she emphasized each word. "Jackson's just a kid. Don't talk to my son like that." Hearing those words, I felt like someone had just slapped me in the face. Clearly, Jackson was the one who provoked first, but I was the one being blamed. I was about to respond when Anna gently pulled my hand, signaling me to stop. She looked at me with eyes that seemed to say, "Don't. It's not worth it." Partly because of Anna's silent advice. Partly because I didn't want to fight on Mom's happy day. I had to swallow my anger and led Anna to sit on the sofa. At that time, I told myself to let it go. He was just a mischievous kid, not worth my attention. I had no idea that this would be the leading cause of the family drama at my mom's birthday party that day. Around 6 in the evening, after the food had been set on the party table, Mom's birthday party officially began. Everyone gathered around the long table placed in the middle of the living room. Candles were lit, flickering light casting on smiling faces. The whole family sang happy birthday together. My mom stood in front of the big cake, her eyes welling up with emotion. When Mom blew out the candles and cut the first slice of cake, the whole room applauded. I had to admit that moment looked really warm. If you didn't know what was hiding beneath this happy surface, anyone would think this was a perfect family. After cutting the cake, Mom stood up to thank everyone for coming and invited everyone to raise their glasses. She spoke emotionally about family, love, and connection. For the first 30 minutes of the party, the atmosphere was quite cheerful. Dad and Mom sat in the center of the party table. Sitting right next to my mom was Jackson, who had been given the special seat she favored. I sat next to Jackson and Anna sat right next to me. While everyone was chatting animatedly, I occasionally caught Jackson glancing at me. The kid's eyes were somewhat calculating, as if he was thinking about something. In the middle of the party, something I never expected happened. I was sitting talking to Anna and getting food for her when I suddenly felt my pants get wet right at the thigh area. A burning sensation spread out, making me jump. I quickly looked down and saw a puddle of soup spreading on the fabric of my pants, soaking deep into my skin. I turned and saw Jackson holding an empty soup bowl. The kid was grinning, his eyes full of triumph as he just completed an interesting game. First, I thought he accidentally spilled it. Accidents can happen to anyone, especially kids. Anna, seeing that scene, was equally surprised. She quickly grabbed napkins from the table and handed them to me so I could wipe off the soup that had gotten on my pants. When I hadn't even touched the napkin yet, Jackson's following words left me speechless. Not an apology. No remorse. The kid tilted his head to look at me with a big grin, then said something that made my whole body freeze. Lick it off. Hearing those words, I felt like I'd been struck by lightning. I stared at Jackson's face, unable to believe what I'd just heard. My 10-year-old nephew had just spilled soup on me and demanded I lick it off. Anna also froze next to me. She turned to look at Jackson, her eyes wide with shock, and that's when I realized this wasn't an accident. Jackson had deliberately spilled soup on my pants. This was intentional, premeditated behavior. He wanted to humiliate me in front of the whole family. Anger erupted in me. My hands clenched. I shot up, pushed my chair back, and yelled in Jackson's face. "What did you just say? You told me to lick off the soup you just spilled on my pants?" My voice echoed throughout the room, cutting off all laughter and conversation. Jackson immediately changed his attitude. The kid turned and hugged my mom tightly, his face turning into a pitiful, frightened expression. But I still caught the cunning look hidden in his eyes. Everyone turned to look at me. The laughter and chatter suddenly stopped. The atmosphere in the room thickened, heavy to the point of suffocation. David, my cousin, sitting at the other end of the table, spoke up to break the silence. "What's going on, Adrian?" I took a deep breath, trying to control my anger, then replied, "Jackson spilled soup on my pants, then demanded I lick this soup off." Right after I finished speaking, the whole party room fell into a terrifying silence. No one clinked glasses. No one said another word. Everyone stopped what they were doing. I stood there, feeling every gaze pouring down on me. Some looked at me with surprise. Some looked at Jackson with disbelief. And some just looked down, avoiding the awkward situation. Then suddenly, loud laughter rang out, breaking the tense silence. The person who just laughed was my sister, Daisy. Daisy's laughter echoed throughout the party room. She laughed as if she'd just heard the funniest story of her life. That laughter was jarring, full of provocation, and entirely devoid of any hint of shame or remorse. Hearing that laughter, I pushed my chair aside and stepped toward her. My eyes looked straight into Daisy's eyes, and I asked directly, "What the hell are you laughing at?" The atmosphere was tense like a guitar string about to snap. Everyone held their breath waiting. Seeing my anger, Daisy stopped laughing. She looked at me with challenging eyes, then replied in an indifferent voice, "You yelled at Jackson earlier. Jackson just gave you a lesson. He's just a kid, don't overreact." Hearing what my sister said, I couldn't believe what I'd just heard. While I was still speechless with anger, my dad and mom spoke up. My mom reached out to stroke Jackson's hair, her voice gentle but with a bias so clear it couldn't be denied. "Adrian, don't overdo it. It's just fun. Jackson's still young. Don't hold it against him." Right after mom spoke, my dad chimed in. "That's right, you're an adult, you should know how to be patient with kids. Making a scene in the middle of a party like this, aren't you ashamed?" Hearing those defensive words from my parents, an empty feeling invaded me. Not pain, not anger, but an ultimate disappointment, so deep it couldn't be expressed in words. My parents, who should have stood on the side of what's right, chose to defend their spoiled grandson instead of their son. They didn't ask Jackson to apologize. They just wanted me to be silent and accept being humiliated. After everything that happened, I realized a harsh truth that I tried to deny for so many years. In this family, I was never valued. After the incident, the relatives in the party room split into two camps. Some people stayed silent, looking down at their plates, not wanting to get involved in family business. Others whispered to each other. And then, in that tense atmosphere, Lucas stood up. Lucas was my cousin. He was 3 years younger than me, and one of the few people in the family I could still talk to. Lucas had witnessed the whole thing from beginning to end. After standing up, Lucas pointed at Jackson, his steely voice ringing through the party room. "This isn't a joke." Jackson deliberately spilled the soup and said disrespectful things. "He needs to apologize to Adrian immediately." Hearing those words, I felt a bit of warmth inside. At least in this family, there was still someone who dared to speak the truth, who dared to defend what was right. After Lucas criticized, Daisy immediately turned to look at Lucas like an angry beast. She screamed, "This is my family business. Don't interfere." My dad also spoke up to defend Daisy and Jackson, his voice cold and decisive. "Lucas, after this time, don't show up at family parties anymore. You're not welcome here." My mom didn't say anything, but her eyes, as she looked at Lucas, were also full of annoyance. Hearing those harsh words, Lucas stood frozen. His face turned red, whether from anger or humiliation. He looked around the room, taking in the familiar faces that turned their backs on him, and then he smiled bitterly. Without saying another word, Lucas grabbed his coat from the chair and walked toward the door. His steps were heavy, but his head was still held high. Watching Lucas's back, I felt something breaking inside me. He was trying to uphold justice, but he was dismissed. He was excluded from the family just for daring to speak the truth. And I knew, if I continued sitting here, I would also have to swallow my humiliation and stay silent like so many times before. But this time, I didn't want to be quiet anymore. When Lucas had just taken a few steps toward the door, I called out loudly, "Lucas, wait a minute." Lucas stopped and looked at me. His eyes were still full of anger and hurt. I looked straight into his eyes and continued, "Wait, I'm coming with you." After saying that, I stood up and pulled Anna to stand up with me. She looked at me with concern, but didn't say anything. She gripped my hand tightly, and I felt the silent support from that small hand. But I didn't leave right away. I walked over to where Daisy was sitting. For a moment, everything seemed to move in slow motion. I saw the soup bowl still full on the table, right in front of Daisy. And then, without warning, I quickly grabbed the soup bowl and poured it straight over my sister's head. The hot soup flowed down Daisy's hair, down her forehead, down her face, down her shoulders. She couldn't react in time. She just sat there, eyes wide, soup dripping from her chin onto her expensive dress. Then, screaming rang out. Daisy jumped out of her chair, her screams tearing through the air like an alarm siren. She yelled, her voice shrill and full of panic. "Are you crazy? Have you lost your mind? What the hell are you doing?" The whole party room seemed to explode. Everyone stood up, some covered their mouths in shock, some stepped back in fear, and some ran to get towels for Daisy. I stood there, calmly watching the chaos before me. Then I turned to look at my parents, my voice cold as ice. "You said this was a joke. Then why don't you lick the soup off Daisy's head?" That sentence was like a bomb exploding in the room. My dad shot up, He pointed his finger at my face and yelled, "Adrian, how dare you say things like that to us? From now on, never set foot in my house again." My mom was crying. She hugged Jackson as if protecting the kid from a dangerous person. She still stood by their side, as she had always done for so many years. A few tense seconds passed. I looked straight into Dad's eyes and said, "You're kicking me out? Fine. I don't want to stay in this house for another second anyway." After saying that, I turned my back and walked toward the door, Anna walking beside me. Her hand gripped mine tightly, giving me strength. Lucas was already waiting outside, his face showing both surprise and some admiration. Screaming, crying, and cursing echoed behind me, but I didn't turn back. When I stepped through the doorframe, I knew I would never return to this house again. And strangely, I didn't feel sad. I only felt relieved, like I just removed a burden that had been weighing on my shoulders for so many years. On the drive back to Sacramento that night, Anna sat silently beside me. She didn't ask anything. She knew I needed space to think. During those 3 hours of driving, I made the most critical decision of my life. I would take back what belonged to me. The very next morning, I started executing my plan. The first thing was to reclaim the 5% company shares I had given my parents in 2018, when Green Harvest Solutions was just established. Back then, I was naive enough to think that sharing success with family was the right thing to do. I wanted my parents to enjoy the fruits of my labor. Every month, they received 5% of the company's profits. As the business grew, that amount continued to increase, with some months reaching nearly $10,000. Luckily, those shares were just a verbal agreement between my parents and me. No legal documents, no contracts, no signatures. That meant I had every right to reclaim them without any legal trouble. That afternoon, my manager called to notify my parents that I would be stopping the profit sharing. Their reaction was exactly what I predicted. My phone rang constantly. Dad's number. Mom's number. I didn't answer. I just watched the phone screen light up and go dark. Finally, I blocked both of their numbers completely. The second thing I did that day was demand back the $130,000 that Daisy had borrowed from me. In 2020, when the pandemic struck, Daisy's husband's construction company faced significant challenges. Projects were stalled, clients canceled contracts, and cash flow dried up. With the kindness of a younger brother, I had transferred $130,000 to her. I didn't request any paperwork or contracts. I received a text message from her requesting a loan and an email confirming the transfer. 2 years passed, but Daisy hadn't paid me back a single dollar. Daisy received the official debt collection notice from the law firm the next day. A letter with cold, legal language, demanding that she pay the full $130,000 within 30 days or face a lawsuit. Right after receiving the letter, Daisy called me constantly, but I didn't answer. I blocked her number too, just like I'd blocked my parents. My family had turned their backs on me, hadn't protected me, had chosen to stand by a spoiled kid, so I would take back everything I'd given them. 3 days after the incident at the party, when I thought everything had temporarily calmed down, my doorbell rang on Saturday afternoon. That day, I was sitting in my office reviewing some financial reports. Anna was in the kitchen preparing dinner. When I heard the bell, I had a bad feeling. I walked out and opened the door. My parents were standing there, right in front of my porch. Next to them were Daisy and Jackson. Seeing them, I felt my body stiffen for a moment. I didn't expect them to come to my house. I had blocked their phone numbers, but I forgot they knew my address. My mom was the first to speak. She forced a strained smile, her voice somewhat pleading. "Adrian, can I come in to talk? We're family. There's nothing we can't work out." I stood still, not letting them into the house. I just looked at them with cold eyes, waiting. My dad tried to keep a serious appearance, but I could see the confusion in his eyes. He'd never had to humble himself like this in front of me before. All his life, he was always the one giving orders, making decisions, the one everyone had to listen to. Daisy stood behind, one hand gripping Jackson's shoulder tightly. She didn't look me in the eye, her gaze avoiding like a child caught doing wrong. After a moment of tense silence, under pressure from everyone's eyes, Daisy pushed Jackson forward. She bent down, her voice trying to sound sweet. "Jackson, apologize to Adrian. Come on, hurry up." Jackson stood there, his face tilted up defiantly. The kid looked at me with eyes showing no remorse, then looked at his mom, then back at me. And then, the kid opened his mouth, his voice full of stubbornness. "I'm not apologizing. I didn't do anything wrong." Daisy's face went pale. She turned to look at Jackson, her voice panicked and somewhat pleading. "Jackson, apologize, I'm begging you." Jackson immediately cut his mom off. The kid yelled, "I'm not apologizing. I didn't do anything wrong." Seeing Jackson's attitude, I felt a deep sadness welling up. Jackson was only 10 years old, but he was already spoiled beyond repair. He didn't know right from wrong. He didn't know how to take responsibility for his actions. And that was the fault of the adults who had spoiled him for the past 10 years. My parents stood there, their faces twisted with helplessness. They didn't know what to say, what to do with the grandson they had helped create. The monster they'd raised had now turned to bite them. I looked at that scene and shook my head in dismay. My voice was cold when I said, "I'm giving you 10 seconds to leave here. If not, I'll call the police." Hearing me mention the police, Jackson suddenly got loud and challenging. The kid yelled, his voice full of contempt, "Call the police. I'm not scared. Nobody's scared of you." The whole family was stunned. My dad yelled at Jackson, his voice shaking, "Jackson, shut up." But the kid didn't bother listening. My mom tried to pull him back, but he jerked away. Right then, Anna appeared behind me. She stood next to me, her voice calm but determined. "Call 911. Honey, forget them." I pulled out my phone and started dialing 911. When they saw my phone screen showing 911, my parents quickly pulled Daisy and Jackson away. They left hurriedly. I stood at the door, watching their figures fade into the distance. My mom was walking and wiping tears. My dad had his head down, and his shoulders seemed to sag. Daisy dragged Jackson along, the kid still turning back to glare at me. When they were completely gone, I closed the door and hugged Anna. She hugged me tight, saying nothing. We stood there for a long time in warm silence. In that moment, I knew I'd made the right decision. Although painful and difficult, I had to protect myself. No one else would do that for me. The days that followed passed peacefully. Daisy had to take out a bank loan to pay back the $130,000 debt to me. She had no other choice, because my lawyer had sent notice that they would sue if she didn't pay within 30 days. Finally, on the 28th day, I received notification of the full $130,000 transfer. My parents also no longer receive 5% profits from my company. They had to revert to living on their retirement money and the meager savings accumulated over many years. I didn't feel guilty. They had chosen Daisy. They had chosen Jackson. And now they had to live with the consequences of that choice. 3 years had passed. I focused on work and building my own life. Anna and I lived a peaceful life, and I never thought I could have had one like that. We bought a new, more spacious house with a garden for Anna to grow flowers. We traveled every vacation, exploring new places. We cooked together every evening, watched movies on weekends, and built our own beautiful memories. Regarding my old family, I occasionally received news about them through Lucas. He was the only one in the family who still kept in touch with me. We met for lunch once or twice a month, and he told me what was happening with my family. Lucas said that my parents still often mentioned me, but always with a tone of reproach, implying that I was an ungrateful son. They never mentioned what Jackson had done, nor did they admit they were wrong. Daisy never mentioned my name, as if I didn't exist. She still lived her life, continuing to spoil Jackson the way she always had. And Jackson? The kid got more rotten every day. No one dared control him, no one dared tell him he was wrong. He became an unruly teenager, constantly causing trouble at school, fighting, bullying classmates, and talking back to teachers. Daisy and her husband were called to school continually, but they always found ways to make excuses for their son. When I heard those stories, I shook my head in disbelief. I had warned them, but they didn't heed my warning. They thought spoiling was loving. They didn't understand that real love sometimes means being strict, teaching, and letting children learn to take responsibility for their actions. For 3 years, I didn't talk to my parents. I hadn't seen Daisy or Jackson in 3 years. For 3 years, I lived my own life, free from toxic relationships. When I thought it was completely over between them and me, they came looking for me again. It was a typical October afternoon at the office. That day, I was sitting in a meeting with the board of directors, discussing plans to expand the market to the Northeast region. Everything was going smoothly when there was a knock on the door. My secretary walked in, her face somewhat confused. She bent down and whispered in my ear, "Sir, someone wants to see you. They said they're your family." Hearing the word family, I felt a cold sensation run down my spine. I signaled for the meeting to pause and stepped out to the waiting area. My parents were standing there. Next to them was Daisy, no Jackson. Seeing them, I realized 3 years had changed them a lot. My dad looked visibly older, his face full of deep wrinkles. My mom had become thinner. Her eyes were sunken deeply, and her walk was no longer as quick as it had been before. Daisy also no longer had her old arrogant look. She looked at me with eyes full of worry and pleading. I brought them into a private conference room. I didn't invite them to sit. I just stood there, arms crossed, waiting for them to speak. My dad was the first to speak. His voice was labored, each word like it was squeezed from his throat. "Adrian, I know you're still angry, but we're family. Family needs to help each other in difficult times." After Dad's words, my mom stepped forward. She tried to grab my hand, but I stepped back. Her voice choked. "I'm begging you to help the family. Jackson, he's in big trouble." Daisy continued after Mom, her voice trembling and full of desperation. "Jackson? He beat up a classmate. The other kid had to be hospitalized. Broken ribs, brain trauma, internal organ damage. The doctor said he might never fully recover." Hearing what they said, I showed no emotion on my face. But inside, I felt deep sadness. Not sad for Jackson, but sorry for his victim, an innocent child who had to bear the consequences of blind spoiling from irresponsible adults. After a few seconds' pause, Daisy continued speaking, her voice about to break. "The victim's family is demanding $1.5 million in compensation. You're the only one who can help. Mom and Dad don't have money. I don't have enough either. My husband's company still owes the bank. Please help the family." As soon as Daisy finished, my dad also chimed in, his voice pleading, "Adrian, you're the most successful person in the family. You can help. Please let go of the past. We can't let Jackson's future be ruined." I stood there, silent for a long time after what they said. A few seconds later, I walked to the desk and got a bottle of water. I turned back and placed the water bottle on the table in front of them. Then I opened the cap and poured all the water onto the floor. All three looked at me, stunned, not understanding what I was doing. The puddle of water spread on the shiny wooden floor, reflecting the ceiling lights. I looked straight into their eyes, my voice cold. "I'll help with one condition only. Kneel and lick up this puddle, just like Jackson demanded I do 3 years ago." The whole room fell into silence. A heavy, suffocating silence, as if the entire space had frozen. My dad's face contorted with anger and humiliation. His hands trembled as he pointed at my face. He yelled, How dare you humiliate us like this? You're ungrateful. You're no longer my son." My mom sobbed. She stammered through her crying, "Adrian, how could you be so cruel?" Daisy went pale. She couldn't say a word, just stood there like a statue. I stood calmly, looking at them without blinking. I had been waiting for this moment for 3 years, not for revenge, but to make them understand the feeling I had endured. After nearly a minute, I stepped closer, looked straight into Dad's eyes and said, "My family died that day. You 3 are just strangers who share DNA with me." Hearing my words, my dad got angry, and he lunged toward me like he wanted to hit me. My mom and Daisy quickly pulled him back. I stepped out of the conference room and called security. When 2 security guards walked in, I ordered in a steely voice, "Get these 3 people out of the building immediately. From now on, they're not allowed to set foot in here again. If they try to break in, call the police." Before they were taken out, I added one final sentence. "If you dare do anything to affect my company or my reputation, I won't let it slide." They were taken out amid screaming and crying. My mom walked away yelling that I was an ungrateful son who heaven would punish. My dad was just silent. Daisy sobbed. I stood at the conference room door, watching them fade into the distance down the hallway. I didn't feel satisfied. I also didn't feel guilty. I just felt a strange emptiness, as if a chapter in my life had just completely closed. Since that day, I have never seen them again. 1 month after they came looking for me, I proposed to Anna and she said yes. We're planning to get married in 3 months. A small, cozy wedding, just close friends and Lucas as the only family member from my side. I don't need a big wedding with fake relatives. I need people who genuinely love me. My life now is truly peaceful. I've built my own family with people who really care about me. Through this story, I have some advice for you. First, about raising children. If you have kids, teach them to respect others, to take responsibility for their actions, and to know that every action has consequences. Don't spoil them to the point where they think they can do anything without paying a price. Because someday when they cause big trouble, you'll be the one who has to bear the consequences. And by then, it might be too late to rectify the situation. Second, family should be where you're loved and protected, not where you're looked down on and humiliated. If your blood family doesn't treat you like a human being worthy of respect, you have the right to leave. You have the right to build your own family with people who genuinely love you. Third, about favoritism. If you're a parent with multiple children, treat them all fairly and equally. Don't let one child feel like they're always put last, always overlooked, always having to give in, because that favoritism will create wounds that never heal. And someday you might lose that child forever, as my parents failed me. Before ending this story, I want to ask you a question. If I were you at that party, would you have left as I did? Or would you happen to have an alternative approach to handling it? And do you think my action, demanding they lick the water I poured on the floor, was too cruel? Or was it what they deserved to hear after everything they did to me? Please feel free to leave your thoughts in the comments. I really want to hear everyone's opinions. Thanks for listening to my story. If you found this video helpful, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. I look forward to seeing you again in the following stories. Are you even Grandpa's real granddaughter? Why are you fighting me for him? That's what my niece said, right to my daughter's face, in the middle of last year's Christmas dinner. The moment those words hit the air, I felt like someone had just slammed a sledgehammer into my chest. Because that's how my 9-year-old found out the secret I'd been hiding for 9 years. She's not my biological daughter. But what hurt me the most wasn't Christmas night. It was what happened 3 days later, when my 9-year-old walked out, leaving a note behind. A lesson that cost my entire family dearly. Before I delve into the details, thank you for taking the time to listen to our story today. Hello everyone, I'm Landon, a 34-year-old software engineer working remotely in Denver, Colorado. The story I'm telling today happened on Christmas night last year, but it all started 9 years ago, when the woman I loved most decided she no longer wanted to be a mother. Back then, I was 25 and head over heels in love with a girl named Brittany. When she told me she was pregnant, I was so happy that I ran to the jewelry store that same afternoon to buy an engagement ring. My life felt like a romantic movie heading toward its happy ending. But life isn't a movie. 3 months after Ruby was born, I came home from work to find our apartment empty. Brittany had disappeared with Shane, my best friend since high school. She left a note. I wasn't born to be a mother. You'll take better care of her than I ever could. That night, I sat alone in the dark apartment, wondering if Ruby was even mine. Shane and Brittany had known each other before I even came into the picture. But then I looked at the baby sleeping in her crib and I decided I'd never get a paternity test. To me, Ruby was my daughter. DNA doesn't measure love. For 9 years, I raised Ruby by myself. She grew up not knowing the truth, and I planned to tell her when she was old enough to understand. But every time I was about to say something, I'd remember how Ruby would watch movies about orphans on TV. She'd turn to me with tears in her eyes and say, "Dad, if I weren't really your daughter, I'd be so sad. Mom already left me, and if you weren't my real dad either, who would I have left?" Every time I heard that, the confession would get stuck in my throat. My family knew the truth too, but they agreed to keep it quiet. My parents live in Milwaukee, about an hour's drive from Denver. My sister, Gina, lives near Mom and Dad with her husband, Chad, and their 10-year-old daughter, Riley. Because of the distance, Ruby only saw Grandma and Grandpa about 4 times a year. For 9 years, Everything had been fine until Christmas night the previous year, when I decided to bring her back to Milwaukee to celebrate with Grandma and Grandpa. During the 5-hour drive from Denver to Milwaukee, Ruby couldn't sleep because she was so excited. She kept asking over and over, "Dad, does Grandpa remember me? Did Grandma make apple pie?" The whole way there, Ruby bragged to me about the gifts she prepared. A drawing of our entire family for Grandpa. A handkerchief with embroidered snowflakes for Grandma. I knew that for Ruby, every trip to Milwaukee was like a festival. When the car turned onto familiar Greenfield Avenue, Dad was standing on the porch waiting despite the bitter cold. Before I could even turn off the engine, Ruby jumped out of the car, ran across the snow-covered lawn, and threw herself into his arms. Dad lifted her, spun her around, and laughed. "I missed my little girl, too. You've gotten so big." That's when I noticed Riley. She was standing in the glass doorway, arms crossed over her chest, eyes glued to the scene of Grandpa holding Ruby. Every year, Riley would run out with Grandpa to greet us. But this time, she stood still like a little statue. Gina appeared at the door, gave me a quick hug, and asked in a flat voice, "So you made it. Was traffic bad?" Chad was different, though. He shook my hand and smiled warmly. "Landon, it's been way too long. Come inside. It's too cold to stand out here, or we'll all catch something." Walking into the house, the smell of cinnamon and baked apples filled the air. Mom wrapped Ruby in a tight hug and pulled her into the kitchen to see the apple pie. I noticed Riley was still standing in the corner of the living room, not coming over. Normally, when the two girls saw each other, they'd hug tight and run upstairs to play right away. At the time, I thought, she's 10 years old now, mood changes are regular. Gina followed Mom into the kitchen, and I heard her speak up in a slightly bitter voice. "You made apple pie? Riley likes pumpkin pie better." Mom kept her kind smile and replied, "I made both. Honey, I don't forget either of them." Gina didn't respond, but I caught her glancing toward Ruby. That look only lasted a second, but it wasn't the look of an aunt watching her niece. It was the look of someone keeping score of who was getting more. At the time, I brushed off the negative thoughts. I had no idea that before we arrived, Gina had said something to her daughter, and those words were about to explode right at dinner. Dinner started at 6 o'clock. Mom had been preparing all day. Golden roasted turkey, mashed potatoes, cranberry sauce, green beans sautéed with garlic butter, and 2 pies waiting in the kitchen. Everything on the dinner table was perfect down to the last detail. Everything, except the atmosphere. The trouble started right with the seating arrangement. Ruby ran over to grab Grandpa's hand and said, "Grandpa, I want to sit next to you." Less than 2 seconds later, Riley spoke up from the other side of the table. "I want to sit next to Grandpa, too." Dad looked at both his granddaughters, laughed heartily, then pulled out the middle chair and patted both sides, saying, "I'll sit in the middle. My 2 princesses sit on either side." Fair enough? Ruby happily climbed into the chair on the left, while Riley sat down on the right, looking like someone owed her money. I noticed the girl shot a glance at her mom, as if she were waiting for orders. Dinner began, and Ruby started telling Grandpa about everything. She excitedly talked about her new teacher, about the class hamster she got to take home and care for a week, and about the snow house painting she was working on at school. Dad listened, occasionally nodding and asking follow-up questions. Meanwhile, Riley sat silent as a statue, using her fork to push a piece of potato around her plate. She wasn't eating, wasn't talking, just occasionally looking up at her mom, then back down again. The way mother and daughter kept looking at each other made me feel like I was watching them communicate in a secret language. Halfway through dinner, Gina put down her knife and fork and spoke up, her voice trying to sound casual but loud enough for the whole table to hear. "Dad, Riley just won first place in the school art contest. Did you know that?" Dad turned to his granddaughter and smiled. "Really? That's wonderful, sweetheart. I'm so proud of you. Show me the painting later, okay?" Riley was about to speak when Ruby jumped in, her voice innocent. "Grandpa, I drew a picture for you too. I drew our whole family standing in front of a Christmas tree." Dad turned to Ruby and nodded. "Is that so? After dinner, you can show it to me too. Okay." In that moment, I saw Riley grip her fork tighter. A small detail, easy to miss, but I saw it. and Gina saw it too. She looked straight at me, then spoke in a bitter voice. Ruby's fortunate. Every time she comes here, she gets all of Grandma and Grandpa's attention. I tried to stay calm and said, Gina, Ruby rarely gets to see Grandma and Grandpa. 4 times a year. Riley sees them almost every day. Gina shot back immediately. Sees them every day but doesn't get this kind of attention. When Ruby comes home, it's like the whole family's welcoming a princess. The atmosphere at the table froze solid. Mom was holding a ladle to serve sauce. Her hand stopped in midair. Chad put his hand on his wife's shoulder and said quietly, Gina, come on, it's Christmas. Gina brushed her husband's hand away and turned to look at him with eyes that could melt glaciers, then said, don't get involved. Chad went silent, pulled his hand back, and continued eating. I didn't blame him. Living with Gina for 12 years, he'd probably learned when to keep his mouth shut. Mom tried to salvage the situation with a forced cheerful voice. Who wants dessert? The apple pie just came out of the oven, still warm. There's pumpkin pie too. Before she could even stand up, Riley suddenly spoke. The girl's voice wasn't loud, but it rang out crystal clear. I don't like apple pie. Apple pie is Ruby's. Everything is Ruby's. Then she pushed back her chair, stood up, and ran upstairs. Dinner ended in silence. Nobody finished their food. Mom cleared the dishes with sad, droopy eyes. Dad sat still, looking down at his hands. Ruby sat next to me, her eyes wide open, not understanding what had just happened. I thought that was the peak of the jealousy, but no. The gift exchange 15 minutes later was what still scares me whenever I think back on it. The living room was bright with Christmas lights. Dad sat on his familiar brown leather couch, Ruby on one side, the other side still empty. Riley hadn't come down yet. Chad looked up the stairs, then stood up and said to Gina, let me go get her. Gina just nodded slightly, her eyes still glued to her phone screen. I heard Chad's footsteps going upstairs, then the sound of quiet conversation drifting down. I couldn't make out what he said to his daughter, but about 5 minutes later, Riley appeared at the top of the stairs. She walked down step by slow step, face sullen, eyes still a bit red. I didn't know what conversation father and daughter had just had, but at least she'd agreed to come down. Riley sat down next to Grandpa, across from Ruby. She didn't look at anyone, just sat hunched up like a cat that had been punished. Mom tried to make the atmosphere more cheerful when she turned to both granddaughters and said, all right, time to open presents. Who wants to go first? Ruby raised her hand and cheered. Me, I want to go first. Dad smiled, reached for 2 big gift boxes under the Christmas tree, gave one to each girl and said, you 2 open them at the same time. I got my 2 granddaughters the same thing. Ruby tore the wrapping paper excitedly, while Riley unwrapped hers slowly, like she was trying to drag out the time. When the box lids opened, both girls saw brand new tablets. The moment she saw the gift, Ruby squealed with joy, jumped up to hug Grandpa tight, and said, thank you, Grandpa. I love you most in the whole world. Riley also stood up to hug Grandpa, but her hug was more forced. When she let go, her eyes glanced at Ruby with obvious irritation. I noticed it, but I thought it was probably just normal kid jealousy. Ruby hugged her new tablet, eyes sparkling bright, then turned to Grandpa and asked, Grandpa, will you watch a movie with me? I want to watch cartoons with you. Dad smiled at his granddaughter and nodded. Of course, sweetheart. Let me see what movies you like. In that moment, Riley shot up. Her voice shook when she spoke, like she'd been holding something back for a very long time. Why is it always Ruby? I want you to watch movies with me, too. Dad turned to Riley, his voice gentle and patient. Riley, I'll watch with both of you. Let me watch with Ruby first because... Before he could finish his sentence, Riley cut him off, her voice shrill. Because Ruby lives far away? It's always because Ruby lives far away. Ruby lives far away, so Ruby gets everything. Ruby lives far away, so everyone loves Ruby more. Tears started streaming down her face. Gina immediately stood up, walked over to hold her daughter, and comforted her. It's okay, honey. It's okay. I'm here. But while her mouth spoke comforting words, Gina's eyes looked at Dad with a gaze full of accusation. A look that seemed to say, do you see now, Dad, how you treat your real granddaughter? I was about to stand up and say something when Ruby spoke first, her voice small and confused. Riley, I'm sorry. How about Grandpa watches movies with you first? But Ruby didn't get to finish her sentence. Riley lifted her head from her mother's arms, looked straight at Ruby's face, and said clearly, word by word, "Are you even Grandpa's real granddaughter? Why are you fighting me for him?" The entire room felt like someone had hit the pause button. I saw Mom holding a glass of water. Her hand was shaking as she set it down on the table. Dad sat there, mouth open like he wanted to say something but couldn't get any words out. Ruby stood frozen, eyes wide open, looking at Riley like she didn't understand what she'd just heard. I stepped forward, trying to keep my voice calm even though my heart was pounding wildly, and asked Riley, "Riley, what are you saying? Who told you that?" But Riley didn't stop. She was like a dam that had burst, and water held back for 9 years suddenly poured out in a torrent. Her mom told me. Her mom said she's a bastard child. Her dad isn't her real dad. Her mom left her to run away with another man because she belongs to someone else. Every word was like a knife stabbing straight into my chest. I turned to look at Gina, my throat choking as I asked, Did you tell your daughter those things?" Gina didn't answer my question. She responded differently. She stood up straight, looked at me without blinking, and said, "Riley's just telling the truth. You're raising some cheating woman's kid, then forcing our whole family to treat her like real family. Everyone has to pretend, everyone has to act. Aren't you tired of it?" Chad immediately covered his daughter's mouth, pulled Riley behind him, and yelled at his wife, "Gina, shut up. Are you insane?" Gina turned to her husband, her voice shrill as she shot back, "You shut up. This is my family business. You're an outsider. You don't have the right to interfere." I stood there, feet nailed to the floor. Everything was happening too quickly. My brain couldn't keep up with it. Then a tiny voice next to me brought me back to reality. Ruby was looking at me, her face pale as paper, lips trembling as she asked, "Dad, you're not my real dad? Is Riley telling the truth, Dad?" That question made my throat lock up. I knelt, grabbed her shoulders and said, my voice shaking, "Ruby, listen to me." But before I could explain, Dad stood up. He walked to the middle of the room, and when he spoke, his voice was deep and cold to a degree I'd never heard in my 34 years as his son. "Ruby is my granddaughter. Riley is also my granddaughter. I love them both the same. I've never played favorites." Mom also stood up, her eyes red with fury, and she turned to Gina, speaking in a voice choked with emotion but hard as steel. "Gina, you have no right to insult that child. Do you know what you just did? You just destroyed a little girl's soul." Gina still wouldn't back down as she responded to Mom, "I'm just telling the truth. The truth this whole family has been hiding for 9 years. Why should I stay silent? Why should my daughter have to suffer while—" Dad cut her off, his voice cold as ice. "Get out of my house. Right now." Gina stood stunned, like she couldn't believe her ears. "You're kicking me out?" Dad looked straight into her eyes, not a hint of hesitation. "You chose to hurt a child to vent your jealousy. You don't deserve to sit in this house tonight. Get out, now." Chad didn't say anything, just quietly pulled his wife's hand. Riley stood behind her dad, her eyes wide, probably just now realizing what consequences her words had caused. Gina was about to say something else, but Chad had already pulled her toward the door. The door closed, the sound of a car starting and rolling away into the night. In that moment, I realized tonight would be the longest night of my life. After the sound of Gina's car rolled away into the distance, the living room fell into a heavy silence that was suffocating. Mom was crying silently, and Dad stood like a statue in the middle of the room. And Ruby, she still stood in the same spot, eyes empty, staring into space. I walked over to her, knelt and said gently, "Ruby, come upstairs with me, sweetheart." She didn't answer, just reached out to take my hand. Her tiny hand gripped so tight I could feel each knuckle trembling. We walked up the stairs in silence, step by step, like we were both afraid that, if we moved faster, something would shatter. My old bedroom looked precisely the same as it had 20 years ago. Faded baseball posters, the twin bed with the blue plaid comforter, and the wall clock still ticking steadily. I turned on the nightstand lamp, and a soft, yellow light filled the room. Ruby climbed onto the bed, hugged a pillow to her chest, and sat hunched in the corner. She looked down at the floor, didn't say a word. I sat down next to her, also not knowing where to start. The silence stretched on. Then Ruby spoke, her voice hoarse from crying. "Why did you hide this from me?" A simple question, but it carried the weight of 9 years of lies. I took a deep breath, took her small hand, and said, "I was scared, Ruby. I was scared that if I told you, you'd think I was abandoning you. I wanted you to grow up knowing you were loved before you knew the truth. I wanted you to have enough strength to face it." Ruby looked up at me, tears streaming down her cheeks, and asked, "But I found out in the worst possible way, Dad. Why did I have to hear it from Riley? Why did I have to find out in front of everyone like that?" The question tore my heart apart. Because she was right, I'd had 9 years to prepare, 9 years to find a way to tell her, but I kept putting it off. And now, the truth had been exposed in the most brutal way possible. I told Ruby everything about her mother. My voice choked as I said, "Your mom wrote that she wasn't born to be a mother. She thought I would take better care of you. And she was right, Ruby. I looked at you for the first time in the hospital, and you were so tiny, so red, and I knew right then that I would do anything to protect you. Anything." Ruby sobbed uncontrollably, burying her face in the pillow. I pulled her into my arms, held her tight as if letting go would make her disappear. We sat like that for a very long time. I don't know how long. I just knew my shirt was soaked with her tears. After a while, Ruby lifted her head and looked at me. Her eyes were swollen and red, but in them was a question more painful than anything I'd ever heard. "So what am I, Dad? Mom didn't want me. You might not be my real dad. So who am I? Who do I belong to?" That question was like a knife stabbing through my chest. I gripped her shoulders, looked straight into her eyes, and said word by word, "You are Ruby. You are my daughter. No need for blood. No need for paperwork. No need for anyone's approval. You are my daughter. You're everything I have in this world." Ruby looked at me for a long time, like she was trying to find something in my eyes. Then she whispered, "I need time, Dad. I need to think." I nodded, not daring to say anything more. She lay down, turned her face to the wall. I sat next to her, back against the bed frame, eyes looking up at the ceiling. That night I didn't sleep. I sat watching over her until dawn crept through the curtain cracks. The next morning we drove back to Denver. Before we left, Mom hugged Ruby for a long time and whispered in her ear, "You'll always be my granddaughter. Always. Don't ever forget that." Dad stood nearby, his eyes red, just stroking Ruby's head without being able to say a word. But the little girl who got in that car wasn't yesterday's Ruby anymore. For the entire 5 hours on I-80, she sat in the back seat, eyes looking out the window, not saying a word. I tried turning on music and asked if she was hungry, and if she wanted to stop and rest. Everything was met with a head shake or silence. I told myself time would heal everything. Kids forget quickly. Ruby would be okay. I was wrong. Completely wrong. For 3 days after we returned from Milwaukee, I lived in a world where everything seemed wrong. My Ruby, the child who loved to laugh and talk, suddenly became a silent shadow moving through our apartment. She ate when I told her to eat, slept when I told her to sleep, but those eyes no longer lit up with anything. Every day I tried harder. I cooked the pasta she liked. I suggested watching cartoons together, and I asked if she wanted to go to the park. Everything got a head shake or a yes so small it was barely audible. Maybe the fear I'd carried for 9 years, the fear that Ruby would think she didn't belong anywhere, had finally become reality. That afternoon, I finished my online meeting earlier than expected. The apartment was tranquil. Usually, at this time, Ruby would be sitting at her desk, drawing or watching cartoons in the living room. I called out, "Ruby, where are you?" No answer. I hurried to her room and pushed the door open. The bed was empty. The teddy bear backpack Ruby carried to school every day was no longer on its hook. My heart started beating faster. Then I saw it. A folded piece of paper was lying on her desk, right next to her box of colored pencils. My hand shook as I picked it up and opened it. "Dad, I'm going to find a place for kids like me. I don't deserve to be here. I love you, Ruby." Everything in front of me blurred. My legs gave out. I called the police, my voice shaking so much that the dispatcher had to tell me to breathe and speak more slowly. I called neighbors, called anyone I could think of. Then I ran to my car, drove through every street around our apartment complex, rolled down the windows, and screamed her name like a madman. 2 hours passed in hell. Every corner without a sign of Ruby was another knife cutting into my chest. Then the phone rang. I answered immediately, hands shaking so much I almost dropped it. A gentle woman's voice came through. "Excuse me, is this Landon? I'm calling from Hope Children's Center on Colfax Avenue. There's a little girl named Ruby who says her dad's name is Landon. She's here." Hope Children's Center, a center for orphans and abandoned children. My daughter had found her way there. I drove like a maniac, ran at least 3 yellow lights. When I got there, the sight of her made my throat close up. Ruby was sitting on a plastic chair in the corner of the room, clutching her teddy bear backpack to her chest. Her eyes were swollen, lips pressed tight. When she saw me, she didn't run over like she always did. She just sat there, looking at me with eyes full of confusion. I ran over, knelt in front of her, and hugged her tight, whispering, "Ruby, do you know how worried I was? Why are you here?" Ruby didn't hug me back right away. After a moment, her voice came out, small as a breath. "Aunt Gina said I'm a bastard child. I thought I belonged here. There are lots of kids like me here." My chest felt like someone was squeezing it shut. I held her tighter, said through choking emotion, "Listen to me, sweetheart. Aunt Gina was wrong. Family isn't about blood, Ruby. A family is a group of people who love and care for one another. And I love you. I love you more than anything in this world. You are my daughter. You're everything I have." Ruby burst into sobs in my arms. This time, she hugged me back, her small arms gripping tight like she was afraid I'd disappear. The center worker standing nearby also had red eyes. I stood up, picked up Ruby, and nodded my thanks to them. She rested her head on my shoulder, still sniffling. On the way home, when Ruby had fallen asleep from exhaustion in the back seat, I called Dad and told him everything. The other end was silent for a long time. Then Dad's voice came through, shaking but full of determination. "Let me handle this. Gina needs to understand what she's done to my granddaughter." I don't know what happened at Gina's house that night, but just an hour after the call, my phone started ringing nonstop. Gina's texts were longer than the essays I wrote in college. She said she couldn't sleep for days, regretted it so much that she wanted to turn back time, and said she'd do anything to make it right. For the next 2 weeks, the messages kept flooding in, hundreds of apologies, dozens of missed calls every day. Maybe guilt was eating away at Gina every night. Chad also called me, his voice tired as he described the situation at home. Riley had been crying for days straight because her grandparents refused to see her. The girl was starting to understand that what she said on Christmas night wasn't a joke, and Gina had nearly collapsed, not eating or sleeping, just sitting, staring at her phone, waiting for me to respond. Maybe the two of them were paying the price for what they'd said and done. My parents flew to Denver that weekend, not to do anything in particular, to hug Ruby and sit next to her. Mom made chicken soup, Ruby's favorite from when she was little. Dad read her bedtime stories. They didn't mention Gina at all, like that name had been erased from the family dictionary. 2 weeks later, after many unanswered calls, I finally picked up one of Gina's calls. On the other end, apologies poured out, choked with emotion, begging to talk to her niece for just 1 minute. But I couldn't forgive easily. In my head, everything was still intact. The note on the desk, the orphanage, the question I belong here. Seeing Ruby sitting drawing in the living room with eyes that still hadn't lost their sadness. I hung up without saying another word. I knew I might be too harsh, but I couldn't forgive yet. Not yet, until a month later, when Gina did something I never expected. For the whole month after that, I took Ruby to see a therapist twice a week. She gradually improved, started talking more, and began laughing again, although her smiles weren't as bright as they had been before. I requested to work completely remote, so I could spend all my time with her, because I knew the person most at fault in all this was me. But the past couldn't be changed. I could only try every day to make up for it. A month after Christmas, my doorbell rang on a Saturday morning. I opened the door and stood frozen. Gina was standing there with Chad, Riley, and my parents as well. Gina's eyes were swollen like she hadn't slept for many nights. She was clutching a laptop tightly. I stood at the door, not knowing what to say. Ruby heard the bell and ran out too. But when she saw Gina, she immediately hid behind me, both hands gripping Dad's shirt tight. Gina looked at me, her voice shaking. "Landon, can I come in? I have something I want to show Ruby." I looked at Dad. He nodded slightly, his eyes seeming to say give Gina a chance. I took a breath, then stepped aside, letting them in. Gina sat down in the living room, opened the laptop, and connected it to the TV. Ruby sat next to me on the couch, still gripping my hand tight like she was afraid of being abandoned. Riley sat in the opposite corner, head down, not daring to look at anyone. The TV screen lit up. A photo appeared. Gina holding a tiny newborn baby, her eyes fixed on the child with unmistakable love. Gina spoke. Her voice choked. "This was the day Ruby was born. I was the first person to hold you after Landon. You were so tiny, not even 6 pounds. But when I held you for the first time, I knew I'd love this baby for life." The next photo appeared. Ruby at 1 year old, toddling and learning to walk, with Gina standing behind, both arms spread, ready to catch her. Then a video. Ruby at 2, wearing a flowered dress, running toward the camera and calling out, "Aunt Gina! Aunt Gina!" Clear, innocent laughter echoed through the quiet room. I glanced at Ruby. She was staring intently at the screen, eyes wide. The slideshow continued. Ruby at 3, blowing out birthday candles, Gina sitting beside her, clapping. Ruby at 4 at the Denver Zoo, sitting on Gina's shoulders to see the giraffes. Ruby at 5 was falling asleep on her aunt's shoulder during a road trip. Dozens of photos, dozens of videos, 9 years of memories packed into frames. When the slideshow stopped, Gina turned to Ruby. Tears had been streaming down her face for who knows how long. Gina said, her voice shaking so much I had to lean in to hear clearly, "Ruby, I know you're still mad at me. You have every right to be mad. I said things that adults should never say to children. I hurt you." Ruby remained silent, eyes looking down at the floor. Gina continued, "But after everything, I couldn't sleep. I kept lying there staring at the ceiling, asking myself what I'd done. Then I went through all these photos, these videos, and I realized something." She paused, took a deep breath, and continued, "I'm the adult. I should have protected you, loved you as I had for 9 years. I forgot that you're just a child, and you deserve to be loved. You always deserve it." Gina sobbed, "I'm sorry, Ruby. I'm sorry for making you think you didn't belong in this family. You belong here. You always belong here." Riley stood up and walked over next to her mom. The girl's eyes were also red, her voice trembling. "Ruby, I'm sorry. I didn't know those words would hurt you like that. I just heard Mom say it and repeated it without understanding. I'm sorry. I don't want to lose you." Ruby lifted her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. She looked at Gina, looked at Riley, then looked at me like she was asking for my opinion. I squeezed her hand gently, nodded. Ruby stood up and slowly walked to stand in front of Gina. She stood there for a moment, looking at the woman who, for 9 years, had held her, played with her, and loved her. Then Ruby wiped away Gina's tears and said softly, "I forgive you." Gina hugged her niece tight, sobbing, "Thank you, sweetheart. Thank you, Ruby." Riley ran over to hug them both. Then Mom, then Dad, then Chad, then me. Our whole family hugged and cried in that small living room in Denver. 7 people, 7 hearts, and 1 wound slowly healing. That day, we sat looking through all the photos and videos. Ruby laughed, seeing herself as a baby in diapers running around the house. Gina told funny stories about each moment. Riley and Ruby started talking to each other again, shy at first, then gradually became natural, as if nothing had ever happened. And I realized maybe family isn't about never hurting each other. Family is when you do hurt each other, you still try to fix it. You still try to come back. You still try to love. After that day, Ruby gradually came to accept everything. She stopped asking about her birth mother, stopped wondering about DNA or blood relations. Though I knew deep down she still had scars that hadn't fully healed, at least the light had returned to her eyes. With our family, everything seemed better. More video calls, more frequent visits, stories told entirely instead of hidden away. Gina and I weren't like we used to be, but we were trying. The 2 kids still saw each other every holiday, still competed for Grandpa's attention, but Riley always let Ruby have her way. That was a promise she made to herself, because Ruby deserved to be loved. Ruby was her cousin because Ruby had endured too much. My parents, after everything, always tried to be fair with both granddaughters. Maybe we're like all adults, sometimes showing a slight favoritism in our love, but we can't let that destroy a family. If there's a lesson I want to share with you through this story, it's probably this. Never let a child hear the truth about their identity from someone else's mouth, and never use words as weapons to hurt small souls. That's the end of my story. Do you think I was wrong to hide the truth for 9 years? And if you were Ruby, would you forgive Aunt Gina? Please feel free to leave a comment below to share your thoughts. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and share it with your loved ones. I look forward to seeing you in the following stories.